Hello and welcome to Thursday's Lodge Brother podcast. My name's Victoria Kibble and I'm a district manager.
And I'm Rob Crumpton. I'm a funeral arranger at our branch in Ham.
In today's podcast, we're going to be looking at dispelling some of the myths surrounding funerals. So, Rob, do you want to start us off with some questions?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've always been happy to answer any questions a family may have because, let's be honest, hopefully it's not often that you need to use our services. But when you do, there may be things you're not sure of. And with the question, I think the most common question we get asked is, does a coffin actually get cremated?
Yes, I've had that one too. Along with, do we even need a coffin at all?
Yeah, I mean, sensible questions. And for a cremation to take place, given the way in which a coffin is placed into the cremator, a suitable vessel must be provided. So that's why we use coffins and caskets as long as they're made from wood, natural fibres or cardboard. Metal is not permitted as it cannot break down effectively. So yes, coffins are always cremated with the deceased as part of the whole process. Mm-hmm. And hopefully, in the future, when restrictions are lifted, crematoriums may go back to offering open days. And I think these are such a great way of seeing and understanding the process a little more. And when it comes to burials, it really depends on the burial site, as natural burial grounds may allow a deceased to be placed on a biodegradable board and wrapped in a shroud, to be placed in the grave like some cultures do already. And I must say that not long ago, I actually did a burial like this, where the person was wrapped in the shroud, and it was quite amazing. It was interesting to see that the family gathered around the grave could actually touch his shoulder and say farewell. It had a real personal touch to it. I know it's not something we'd all want to do, but it's the first one I'd ever carried out as a funeral director, and it was wonderful to see. So, yeah.
Oh, thank you. Well, and also thank you for mentioning the open days. I've been on a few myself. I find them so informative. You get to see all around the grounds, you get to see inside the buildings, and then you get to see the processes. So it just gives you that bit more comfort that you know what's going to be happening with your loved one. Really worth a mention that anyone listening today is most welcome to call up any one of our branches. If you have a question yourself, you well know yourself, Rob, and I started off as an arranger too, that we go through quite an extensive bit of in-house training.
Yeah, definitely. And
then we're all given the opportunity to either go forward and sit the certificate in funeral arranging and administration, or even a diploma. So always happy to help offer some advice to anyone, aren't we?
Yeah, it's lovely. Training's very involved and really worthwhile. Another question, I'm just thinking as we're talking then about the open days and what have you, another question I have is, often gets asked is, do you even need a funeral director?
Well, indeed. We would like to say yes, obviously. But it may be a bit of a surprise to our listeners, but actually, no, you don't. So if you're thinking of not having one, you must be mindful that you're going to need to have somewhere to look after your loved one. You need the ability to prepare them and provide a suitable vehicle for when you go to collect them from the place of death. And then the conveyance to the funeral service. You also need to be able to know where to get and how to fill in all of the appropriate paperwork.
Yeah.
And so obviously that kind of makes people think, no, we're going to let somebody that knows what they're doing do that for us. It's going to be a lot easier on the family, and we can then carry on with our grieving process as we would. The other thing to remember is that funeral directors have got that link to all of the extra service providers, the coffin suppliers, the ministers, and our role is the custodian of the loved one. So we will make absolutely any arrangement on the family's behalf where we can. However, we've done it before. We'll certainly guide people through a process if they want us to. And I suppose for us, the one thing lots of our families have tried to do in the past is provide their own coffin. So have you got any advice to people that want to bespoke their own coffin maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I do love it when families do that. It's such a personal touch, for them and their loved one. But it's probably not always as easy as they may think. But the ones that we have seen have just been amazing. And it's a funny point, but sometimes some of the families have even had a carpenter in the family when they've made their own coffin, which is...
That's lovely, isn't
in
it?
a way, is rather poignant, because if you think about how the founder of Lodge Brothers started, that's how this company started.
Yeah, that's right.
Exactly the same way. But there are a few regulations that we have to think about and ensure that bespoke coffins meet regulations and requirements. But when they do either choose a bespoke coffin or they make their own coffin, and they're here in our chapel of rest, we often encourage them to just go that extra step maybe and put some things like stick photographs on the side of the coffins, letters or images. And it's just wonderful to see the families in the chapel of rest, and you can sense that peace and that calmness that it brings to them. And I think also doing this it's almost as calming as adding trinkets and personal effects to a coffin.
Mm-hmm.
And thinking about photographs on the outside, we also work with a company who can actually vinyl wrap most designs around a wooden or metal casket, which on the day can provide a great conversation starter and also highlight the deceased's personality.
I would agree with you, Rob. I mean, when I've conducted funerals and you've got photos, either photos around a coffin or even a photo in a frame at a chapel, it's nice for us as a team to kind of just get a glimpse into our families.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. So, Rob, you mentioned about items in coffins, but can you elaborate a bit for us?
Yeah, I can. If it is a burial that's being held, it's okay to place a loved one in the coffin in full dress. And by this I mean everything, like shoes, glasses, trinkets, things that they've loved all their lives and want to keep with them. So with burials, that's fine. But cemeteries will also give permission at certain times for cremated remains of other loved ones, so they can also be placed in the coffin. Crematoriums, they have more restrictions in place, and that's due to the damage that some items can cause the cremator, whether that be melting or some things will melt or explode. And other man-made items like hard plastics can let off gases which are unsuitable for the filtration system. And this is all to do with our environment and looking after our environment. Talking about natural burial grounds in the same way, they must follow similar guidelines to the crematoria to make sure that items can degrade properly. But as we say to all families, if there's anything you want to do, if there's anything you want to do but you're unsure of, just ask us.
Absolutely.
And we will do our best to make sure it happens and advise you the right way. So, another question that does come to my mind as we're talking cremation in a lot of ways, I guess one of the questions that does come very often is, how can we be sure these ashes are the right ones? How come they're our loved ones' ashes that we're going to receive from you?
Such an important question, Rob. It can lead to quite a bit of anxiety. And yes, I too have had that question asked to me. Regardless of burial or cremation, the checks and the administration that we at Lodge Brothers carry out are rigorous. From the time we're bringing somebody into our care, throughout the time in our care, and onto the day of the funeral. Checks are always completed by 2 people each time, so we know without doubt that the person we are carrying a funeral out for is who it should be. Once we arrive at a cemetery or crematorium, the nameplate and paperwork is supplied as proof to the attendant.
Yeah.
For cremation, a little plate, a little bit of stone, or a name tag is placed on the coffin and follows the coffin throughout the entire process, every single stage of that cremation, ensuring that the cremated remains are returned to the correct funeral director and then on to the correct family, therefore also ensuring that they are and do belong to the right deceased.
Yeah.
It's something that is so important that it's done right, and each individual place has got its own little way, but the outcome is always the same.
And I think, as you say, it is really important, and it is one of those vital things that families ask, and they just trust us to know that we know all about this and can guide them in the right way, and they feel reassured. Thinking about after we've gone through the whole stage of the cremation process and everything else, and then we're looking to celebrate someone's life, and hopefully it won't be much longer, and restrictions at funerals and receptions will be lifted. But question for you, Victoria, do you know the reasons behind a wake?
Well, I certainly know that it's quite dependent on a culture, or perhaps the geography. So different parts of the world, different parts of England do things slightly different.
Yep. Yeah, I knew you'd know. And, well, yes, wakes in England were originally held basically as a prayer vigil.
Right.
But over time, they became less about prayer and more to gather people together, more to console immediate family before the funeral. Whereas, unlike now, where they are more, I guess, commonly held after a service as a celebration of life, in the past, they were also used to safeguard a deceased until the funeral took place, similar to some other religions who still practice this. And if we think about Ireland, they use the word wake in a very literal sense. A big party would be held around an open coffin, and the idea behind that was to make noise and ensure their loved one did in fact not wake.
I do like hearing how words have got such a good meaning to them,
Yeah, I know,
haven't they?
I know.
But no, it's great.
Yeah.
Leads us perfectly, I suppose, onto another question, is that we know that Lodge Brothers, we've helped many, many families that want to take a loved one home the day before or even the morning of a funeral to hold their own service or maybe their own prayers. And it's so lovely to know that we can assist with these requests and give our families the service that they want, either for their own religious or cultural reasons.
Yeah, and, you know, in our hearts, we can't ignore this year that has gone. But it is well mentioned in that we are able to help families should they wish to hold memorial services for their loved ones. And we know that crematoriums have already offered to open up their chapels to make this possible too. And I think I've even heard that there's some green burial grounds as well that are offering the same thing. If they've got that facility there, you know, so you can still do that.
Good, good. And obviously we certainly would help people be guided through and potentially offering things like order services later on down the line if they wanted something like that, wouldn't we?
Yeah, absolutely.
Here's one for you, Rob. Kind of
Go on.
always gets people thinking, can I bury my loved one in my back garden?
Yeah, well, it's not a question, as we're talking about questions that we get asked a lot.
No.
But
I think we normally get it given to us in jest rather than serious question.
yeah, true.
I don't think everybody's got a mausoleum in their back garden.
No.
But if they do, then obviously that's something that's already in place and somebody could be placed there.
But I can understand it as well, you know, that some families would like their loved one there to be close to them. And yes, whilst it is pretty common for domestic pets to be laid to rest in a garden, there aren't too many deceased people in residential gardens. But you might be surprised to know it's not illegal to do so with the right permission.
Okay, so we just contact the council?
That's your first stop, your
Right.
first port of call. Contact your local council. You would need to make them aware, as they may have restrictions and guidelines. I'm pretty sure they have, so, you know, they need to know. And just more practical things that if you think about it, it must be your own home. You can't be leasing a home, and then you move. You know, it's obvious thoughts about what you're going to do with your loved one.
You probably have to
in the
also
garden.
mention
Yes,
it on
yeah,
your
it's
deeds
a good
if you
point
do want to move.
and it's if you are looking at selling your house,
Yeah.
it's a good point to raise.
Yep.
Actually, we've still got our loved one in the garden. So.
I suppose we probably should also mention about scattering of ashes. So if anybody wanted to scatter their ashes in a private setting, they would need to have owner's permission, wouldn't they?
Mm-hmm.
But for me, I've dealt with many, many families now that have actually preferred to have an ashes taken back home, either split up or kept in their entirety and buried in a big pot. And we've worked quite a bit with doing small memorial plaques for that, haven't we? So, yeah, thank you. Rob, thank you so much for your time today, and actually
You're
to
welcome.
everybody that's listened in. Should anybody want to ask any questions, this week we've got our chat bot, which is active on our website, so please do get in touch by logging on and sending us a message. But thank you, everybody.
Thanks a lot.